Welcome back to Film Foundations, the collaborative show between Weirding Way Media and Someone's Favorite Productions. I am your co-host, Chris Dashew of Weirding Way Media and the Culture Cast.
And I am your other co-host, Ryan Verrill from the Disconnected and Someone's Favorite Productions.
When I get introduced first, I don't get to have some pithy one-liner. You're supposed to provide it, Ryan.
I didn't want it to be a disaster.
And this is the visual medium even. On this show, we ask and answer 4 questions about a given topic that is surrounding either an actor, director, franchise, or in this case, for this episode, a micro-genre. Our job is to entice you to broaden your horizons on film, to encourage you to travel down film tangents and side roads that you may have otherwise never traveled on. And boy, I think for Ryan and I, that may be the case tonight, because with our guest, all the way from Flick Attack and the author of Flick Attack Movie Arsenal, Rod Lott, I think we're going to be talking about some movies that we probably have no idea about.
I mean, we'll find out. Keep your seatbelt fastened.
Given the topic, keeping the seatbelt fastened may not keep you alive in the end, though.
Traveling down lots of those side roads.
Yeah. So, Rod, before we get into the topic for this episode, tell us a little bit and our audience about Flick Attack.
Flick Attack is a website I've been running for like 15 years now. Just genre movie reviews, mostly some interviews and things like that. I used to be a professional film critic back in a previous work life. And so this is me continuing that, scratch the creative itch sort of thing that you don't get in your day job. And still enjoy doing it. And we just put out, first book, almost 2 years ago, first book, starting volume 2. So there's, as long as I'm still able to type, I guess I'll still keep doing it.
Hell yeah. I feel that. So I guess that the question then becomes, speaking of genre filmmaking, why on this episode of Film Foundations are we talking about specifically made-for-TV 70s disaster movies? The made-for-TV part is important to this conversation and to this micro-genre specifically, because I think we might even say that 70s disaster movies are a subgenre unto themselves, and then this is the one step further down.
They really are. And, the disaster film cycle really lasted from the 70s. It started in 1970 with Airport and kind of ended in 1979 with the 4th Airport movie, The Concorde, Airport 79. And it, all the big ones came out in that 10-year span. So once you've seen all the movies in there, which include, in addition to all the Airport sequels, The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure, Earthquake. Once you've seen all those movies, there's nothing left to dig into until you get into the made-for-TV stuff. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of these things that really, if you are in the mood for a disaster movie that's not necessarily 3 hours long, like some of them are, half the time investment, and usually at a 10th of the budget or less than that. They still have the all-star casts of, cajillion people, plus Bert Convy. He seems to be in a lot of these things. There's just a lot to dig into. If you again, I say Airport because that is one of the biggest. That was up for Best Picture. The Towering Inferno was up for Best Picture.
Sure was.
Yeah. Airport and also won Best Supporting Actress. Towering Inferno had a Best Supporting Actor nomination. Poseidon Adventure had a Best Supporting Actress nomination. These were huge movies. So, but if you say, Airport, you like airplane disaster movies, there's a whole slew of those that were made for TV. If you like the more water-based things like Poseidon Adventure. There's a whole thing of those. And I mean, it gets crazy. Like you like they never did make a big budget theatrical movie about people trapped in a gondola, that going from like up to a mountain. Yet there are two made for TV movies about that are essentially the same thing. Just with different.
It's pretty cheap, right? It's pretty cheap.
Talk about a one setting movie.
Yeah.
Single room essentially, but not even a room.
Bottle film. I mean, yeah.
So this, there are. I haven't even seen them all, but there are dozens and dozens. For everything that was in theaters, there's at least one or two rip-offs inspired by, like, if you liked Roller Coaster, well, there's the death of Ocean View Park. Like, there's always an analog for those, and often even multiple of them.
And I love that you wanted to do those, not like the big ones. Because, I mean, but to your point, like, here's the thing. Like, if we were like, hey, let's do 70s disaster movies, you laid it out best. Like, that is, in and of itself, such a well-known thing that I'm not saying we can't do it, but to do this is to kind of show the effect of that more so than just, to your point, what, Shelley Winters gets nominated for the Poseidon Adventure, right? Like, people getting nominated for these movies, they were not unknown to people, and especially in the time and place that they're coming out, casting the wide net of people. I mean, O.J. Simpson, a football player known for nothing else, apparently. O.J. Simpson was in The Towering Inferno, and, like, again, that was a big deal at the time. And they had, was it Steve McQueen and Paul Newman? Is that right? Yeah. That's Towering Inferno, right? Like, two actors not to sneeze at, not in the movie because they are forgotten. It's like at their, like, not at their prime, but kind of. I mean, the 70s, like, yeah.
That was their time. That was both. They were never more bankable. In fact, Towering Inferno was the movie where they were competing against whose name is going to go first.
Right, that's right.
Inferno was where they invented whoever's on the left is going to be a little lower, and who's ever on the right is going to be a little higher on the screen. So that's the first time that was used, and you still see that today. I saw it recently on something, I don't remember what, but I was like, Irwin Allen started that just to solve his ego issues with his leading men back then.
And what's crazy is I don't really, to talk about disaster movies more broadly, disaster movies aren't a thing. Like, we get one or two maybe a year, if that. Like, really not as common as they used to be. I mean, look, Deep Impact and Armageddon coming out at the same time is still a weird thing, but there hasn't been like a glut of these movies in the last 15 years. Like, you can name 10 of them, and most of them aren't great. 2012, San Andreas. There's got to be at least one more with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I guess Skyscraper, technically. Yeah. I mean, fucking ridiculous ass movie.
They tend to come in cycles, just like the 70s ones did. The 90s had a little revival, not a decade long, but like, 3 or 4 years where everyone says Independence Day, and I just don't really count that as a disaster movie. But
that's like the disaster movie to end all disaster movies, right? Like,
but we had like Twister, like you said, Deep Impact and Armageddon. Those are two asteroid movies. We had Volcano and Dante's Peak, two volcano movies competing. There was
one an actual volcano, the other one the most ridiculous fucking concept known to man.
Yeah, so that cycle didn't last as long, obviously, and you have the Roland Emmerich. After he did Independence Day, it seemed like that was all he was going to do. He did The Day After Tomorrow, and like you mentioned, 2012. Like, none of these are like great. And maybe they'll come back. Like this summer, we have Twisters, plural, finally coming out, the sequel, which I know had been talked about almost immediately when the first movie came out, but you never know. But now, nowadays they tend to be a Asylum, like premiere on Sci-Fi type stuff, and I just like 12 hurricanes of Christmas, or there's something like that. Like I find that
If that's not a movie, it fucking should be.
something like that. 12 something of Christmas, 12 storms of Christmas, 12. I don't know. I find those unwatchable. I'm not a big fan of the 90s stuff much. There are ones I like, okay. But the 70s, there's something about the 70s ones. And I don't know if it's just because I grew up in the 70s, but I didn't watch these things growing up. There's just something a little nostalgic about it. Like, I guess the first true disaster movie I watched was Airplane, which is the one that spoofed them all. And that's probably most people's, or at least of a certain age, that's probably most people's entry point to these things. But there's something charming about not just disaster movies of the 70s with the big casts and, the special effects. And it's like, yes, there's all these big stars in it, but the real thing is the concept. It's the big building on fire. It's the boat turning upside down. And then to take that to TV, it to me is even more charming. The one thing about it that is odd to me is that the features, there are some that I don't like one of the ones that sort of ended the cycle, speaking of Paul Newman, was When Time Ran Out. And that's with him and Jacqueline Bisset. That was an Irwin Allen thing. The Swarm was another Irwin Allen thing with bees. That was a big bomb. So these things were huge financial failures, and they're just not that much fun to watch. But on the made-for-TV front, I've seen a lot of these, and there's not a single one I haven't enjoyed. Even if it's like, I don't know how many of them are truly good, quote-unquote good, but they're all entertaining. And I can't say that about all the features that were released in theaters. So there's something to be said for that. And it could be the lower budget, like, hey, let's put on a show. They have to rely more on the characters maybe than the incident, whatever that thing is. They tend to oversell themselves by putting an exclamation point in the title a lot of times, kind of like how Airplane did. But yeah, there's just something about those that are a lot of fun. And they were often directed by the same people making the big movies. They often had some of the same cast members too, like Lloyd Bridges for one. He was in a couple of these. But I mean, just over and over and over, like the same supporting cast members, same directors. And again, like the concepts, they just got recycled. Here's a disgruntled employee taking over a plane. Here's a prisoner on a plane who wants it rerouted somewhere else. They just keep, it's nothing new, but it's fun to see on that lower scale for me. How was that for a long answer?
It was a great answer.
It's a good answer.
I was looking through the list of some of these, and what I found to be really funny is every single one seems to have 3 giant names, like literally identically across the board, 3, and then everyone else after that is completely unknown. But they all have 3 huge stars.
But even like the second stringers or whatever, the cast, they're all names, or mostly they're just not necessarily above the line talent. They may not be A players in the films, in theaters, but like these were people whose faces were well known
right.
to TV viewers. So that especially helps. Like Burt Convy. I mean, you can see Burt Convy in one of the airport movies, but he turns up in a ton of these made for TV things, in addition to what seems like every game show and talk show that was on TV at the time.
Boy, ain't that the truth. I mean, he's everywhere.
In the
70s.
He was inescapable. Cannonball Run is almost like a disaster movie, it takes that, to speak of Burt Convy, because since he's one of the bigger stars in that, it takes that big cast and big concept. It's just, there's not a disaster other than Burt Reynolds mugging, I guess, overplaying to the camera. That's a disaster in itself. But that's the kind of, template that they were running with there.
It is interesting, though. I never thought about that, putting that on top of something like Cannonball Run. I mean, that is kind of the benefit and the success of that movie is, you have all these weird people in these weird cars, and it's about the people in the cars, whoever they, like Dean Martin. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but it's a disaster movie without the disaster of it all.
But they all have their own little side stories. Like there's the initial concept, the thing in the middle, what they're doing, and then there's all these side stories you get of everybody who's in it. If there's going to be a love story, or couples getting divorced and they reunite at the end, and there's someone who's hasn't seen their son in X years, or there's often like a cop who's on his last job before retirement, and he won't make it. That's it's always like the old people like put themselves out there to save a younger person, young whippersnapper, and the old people never survive in that instance. You can kind of tell going into it who's not going to live to the end, the final commercial breakaway. But there's just, to just dig in and take them at random. That's kind of how I got into them. I didn't know where to start. I think I started with some that Irwin Allen himself produced, but he only did, a few. And then you get like Hanna-Barbera, the cartoon people. They even did one, which is actually pretty fun, called The Beasts Are on the Street. And that's about zoo animals escaping into the city. That's a lot of fun. It's like everyone wanted to get their hands on these things. And I feel like every network did, because there were only 3 back then, got into this business. And they ran with it. And they were big ratings hits, too. I mean, that was, if you're old enough like me to remember when you just had the 3 channels, like you were watching one of those 3 things that night. So even the thing that was watched the least that week had more viewers than whatever is watched the most now on network TV.
It's fair. Well, and that's why made-for-TV movies were so important, is because they knew people were going to be watching TV. I mean, it was just kind of a given.
Mm-hmm. They
were seen as events. That was a big thing too. Everybody's looking forward to these, especially with the names attached. It's a build director. Like you'll generally know the name, you'll know a lot of the actors, and you go, well, yeah, we're going to tune in on Sunday, of course.
What else we got to do?
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. And that was a time where, TV movies, they were losing, TV viewers were losing eyeballs to movies, where things had flip-flopped. Theaters, that once TV actually became a household thing, they were losing people to TV, and they started, things like color and special effects and things to get more people back in theaters, and then things flipped the other way. And so the TV movie was a way to try and get some of those movie goers back watching TV. You had your Sunday night the movies or Wednesday night the movies. It seemed like every night had its own showcase, or something that played in theaters 2 or 3 years ago, maybe longer, made its debut on TV. Like that was the only way you could see things back then, before VHS, before HBO. It's like, and if it didn't get re-released in theaters, you had to wait until it came on TV to see it again. And so when you didn't have, you'd already shown Superman, you'd already shown Star Wars or whatever, you had to fill those other slots. And they had these things to go to. And most of them, a lot of the made-for-TV movies are dramas, but they did a lot of good horror movies. not so much science fiction, but disaster for some reason is a big one. They had no shortage of them, along with cops. A lot of cops.
One of the things that I feel like these were better than expected is because when you look at the budgets for these and you force somebody to stick within a budget, I feel like especially back in the 70s and 80s, it really forced a newfound sense of creativity for a lot of these people. They just go, oh, well, if we only have, $500,000 to do this entire thing, let's make it fantastic. And they would just completely do something crazy that you would never think they'd be able to do with that money.
Yeah. And we mentioned that it's usually one setting, and it's a fake plane fuselage, right? Like, you don't actually have to go in a plane and shoot it. You just take stock footage for the outside, and the rest is in a studio, built in a fuselage. It's super cheap. There are some bigger ones, like I mentioned, the death of Ocean View Park. That is about a hurricane that's going to hit an amusement park. And it was produced by Playboy, the magazine. But it ends with the destruction of a roller coaster. And it's a real one, but the production lucked into, they found an amusement park that was scheduled to be, demolished. And so they just made a deal to shoot the roller coaster coming down, and they had the huge thing for their movie, right? I'm sure they paid something, but they didn't have to construct a roller coaster to blow it up. They just lucked into it and built a movie around it. So there's a lot of things like that. There are some more ambitious ones, like anything with a car. There are several of those, like a highway. There's one, Death Comes on the Freeway, I think Death Car on the Freeway. It's actually directed by Hal Needham, speaking of Cannonball Run.
Wow.
And it's about a serial killer in a van. And so he just goes off picking people off by, knocking them off the highway and stuff. So highway scenes, obviously, those aren't easy to shoot, but that's probably all their, aside from the 3 actors you talked about who are big names, probably the biggest chunk went to film that. And the rest is in, you have people in your cars with the fake background.
Rear projection.
Yep. So they had creative ways to deliver the big budget style, disaster incident, whatever you call it, that drove these things. But they had their workarounds for the rest, which are evident. But again, I think that's all part of the charm.
So speaking of said charm, let's kind of use this as an opportunity to jump into the first question, because I am very curious now that we've kind of talked specifically about these made-for-TV disaster movies. Rod, what do you consider a foundational title for made-for-TV 70s disaster films?
I decided to go with one that's not produced by Irwin Allen. Since he is considered the master of disaster, that was his, I think, the title the media gave him for Towering Inferno and all that stuff. I decided not to go with one of those, even though I recommend those that he did, which are like Fire, Flood, Cave In. There's several of them. But I chose one that's actually I would say it's pretty good, delivering at a dramatic level and a disaster level. Of course, pieces are cheesy now, but I went with 1979's Disaster on the Coastliner. And this was made for ABC. It stars Lloyd Bridges, to go back to him. It was, this is 1 year before he picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue in Airplane. And he plays a Secret Service agent who is looking out for the wife of the Vice President of the United States, which, as she takes a train from LA to San Francisco. that to me is like TV movie in a nutshell. The theatrical movies would get the president himself. The TV movies get the vice president's wife. It's bizarre to me that they would even take that level down and then go even one level further with the spouse. And I don't even think you see her in the movie. Like, that's how incidental everything is to um, the whole thing. But basically, the story is that Lloyd Bridges is watching over her, but he does it at the Amtrak dispatch station, which is run by E.G. Marshall, who I think at least everybody knows from Creepshow, fighting the cockroaches and having them come out his mouth at the end. Um, so they're at war with each other. Um, and Paul L. Smith is the villain. Everyone should know him from Pieces and Popeye. He played Bluto in Popeye opposite Robin Williams. So he's that big, bald, fat guy that he's one of the villains in the Coen Brothers crime wave. Like, if you don't recognize the name, you've seen him. But he's like a disgruntled employee, where he's wanting to retaliate against the rail service for some ill that he faced. So his actually, I don't. He may not be an employee. I think maybe a family member or something of his died. But the way he gets back is he hijacks train, takes out the engineer, and then reroutes it to put it on a track to go against another train on the same track to collide. So that's the idea there. And then you have Lloyd Bridges and E.G. Marshall fighting in the dispatch about what to do. And, it's the wall of blinking lights, right? Nowadays it'd be 24, CCTV screens at every possible angle. But yeah, now it's just back then, it's just the blinking lights to represent a train going down a track. And their idea to solve this problem is, well, we only have 90 minutes before these trains are going to collide. Let's just build a new track to take it along this other track. We've got 90 minutes to do it. And so they get a whole crew out there who can build 30 yards of track in 90 minutes to reroute this one and then take it away to let the other train go through and derail. And it does derail at the end. And I was surprised at how, it's an actual derailment. It looks really good. It reminded me of kind of not the opening, but one of the instigating incidents in The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, where that train wreck and, he's running from it. There's no one in harm's way like that, but the way the thing crashes, it's pretty impressive, especially for TV. That said, everything probably went expense-wise to film that, and who knows, maybe they were decommissioning this train or something. I don't know that, but just the fact that that's the big action. Everything else is shouting at one another, or Raymond Burr plays the Amtrak president. He just sits behind a desk and gets on the phone every now and then. There's not a lot of action other than that, but it's the way I described it to a friend was, it's like the taking of Pelham $1.23, because it's low budget, but they get it's well acted, it's well directed, it's made by Richard C. Safarian or Serafian. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but he did Vanishing Point, which is a huge cult film. And a speeding car isn't that much different than a speeding train. And it's, when you're talking trains and action, like, I don't know if you saw the last year's Mission Impossible new movie, but it ends with an incredible train sequence. And this is not bad, but this is better than Under Siege 2, which took place on a train.
Whoa, throwing shade at
I
Under
am throwing
Siege
shade.
2 now.
I am throwing shade at Under Siege 2, Dark Territory, Dark Territory.
Colon.
Yeah. But I mean, so you have, and in addition to that, what are the other side plots? Well, you have William Shatner on board the train, and he's a con man, and he's trying to get laid, romancing Yvette Mimieux, who she turns up in a lot of these things too, especially for TV ones. And so there's a romance angle there. Will they or won't they? Spoiler alert, they do. They end up together at the end. But it is totally like something you would see on the big screen, but in 90 minutes. Not much money, but there's some big stars and some familiar faces.
I like that William Shatner's in it.
Oh, who wouldn't? And he's doing William Shatner as the 1979 William Shatner would be. Like, it's very hammy. I don't need to say more. It's William Shatner. You know exactly.
Yeah, it's Shatner.
About right? Yeah.
And he did his own stunts as well. He
Right.
got on top of a moving train, like apparently a psychopath. So, see, Tom Cruise wasn't the only one doing stuff like that. William Shatner did it first.
Yeah. So it also has it's like Michael Pataki. Again, this is one of those guys. It's one of those guys that you'd see every now and then. He was in Airport 77. So again, they reused a lot of the same people. Lane Smith, who a lot of people know as from the Lois and Clark Superman show, he was Perry White editor. He's in it. Pat Hingle, who was in, he was the first Commissioner Gordon in the Tim Burton Batman movies. Nice. So there's a lot of big names, or big-ish names, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's, when I heard coastliner, for some reason my mind went to a ship on water and not a train.
Same.
But it comes up with like that 70s computer font and the like ticker type sound effects, as credits come on, like, and I was like, I don't care what it's on a plane, a train, an automobile, a gondola, I'm watching this. That kind of stuff just hits me. Like you mentioned San Andreas with the Rock, Skyscraper. Like, I enjoyed San Andreas. I hated Skyscraper. There's something though about just the current movies where they spend $100 million, $200 million. I don't want realism in these things. I want half-assed realism, I guess, is it's like, yes, it's cool to see a real train derail, but I want rear projection. That's just kind of, that's the style of cheese I want, and that's what these things deliver. I mean, even Irwin Allen was spending a ton of money on the big screen for these things, but still, the effects being what they were in the 70s, you still get some of that rear projection, and they hadn't perfected like green screens. You can see like the seams around people, that they obviously would be able to erase today. So I love the fact that they're imperfect. That to me is just, it's a drug and I can't get enough of it. And I love that there's still a ton of these things I haven't seen because there are so many. And I have no excuse for not having seen them all because they're all on YouTube or available through questionable third parties. And some I've been released in high def. Like Shout Factory has a new Irwin Allen set that includes some theatrical, like I think When Time Ran Out is on there. I know Beyond the Poseidon Adventure is on there, the sequel to Poseidon Adventure. It doesn't have Poseidon Adventure. It doesn't have Towering Inferno, but it has all the made-for-TV stuff he did. And that it's weird to see those things on Blu-ray now, but that's the world we live in, and I'm okay with it.
One thing I will throw in response to that is one of the things I love about that era that I think makes it this half-assed realism that you're talking about is the same problem plaguing, and here you go, Chris, you can hit the ticker, plaguing the MCU nowadays is
Yes.
Everybody is starting to get sort of jaded because every single movie, the stakes have to be through the roof. And I haven't said anything yet, but I was the weird kid that if you look at all 70s disaster films, I've probably only seen 5 or 6 of them, but I think I've seen the movie Earthquake like 84 times, and I don't know why that was my favorite movie for years when I was a kid. But the funny thing about Earthquake and the other films from this era is you've already talked about these little like side quests that the movie goes on, and the stakes are literally like Ethel hasn't seen John Boy in 3 years, and she's trying to get there fast enough to see him. That's very different than the whole world is exploding and you have to save us. I am pulled out immediately if you're doing something like that. And in these films, I'm immediately engaged because I know Ethel. I spent the last 10 minutes getting to know her, and now I'm invested in her story. The whole world, fuck the whole world. I don't care about any of that shit. I care about this little tiny story.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it. I too am like that. I hate like it. Where do you go from here? It's like the entire world, then the entire universe, then the alternate universes. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And these things, Earthquake. It's a huge earthquake, but it's like limited to one city or one area.
Right.
The Towering Inferno. It's one building, right? But these things, it's like Irwin Allen's made-for-TV Flood. It's a small town. It's not a major metropolitan area, which it would be in the movies, right? Fire is also a small town. It's cheap to film there. Fewer permits. You don't have to deal with all the looky-loos on the street and get permits to reroute traffic and stuff because there's no one around in rural areas. There's just, I know I keep saying the same thing, but there's just something to it that I love the fact. I think it's just more relatable, right? Like we hopefully don't ever have to worry about how are we going to save the entire world, at least not in our lifetimes. I can't say it about any eventual great grandkids, but we all know the feeling of like trying to get to the hospital before, a grandparent dies, or stuck in an elevator, or, this person I love and haven't told them she's about to get on a bus. I better tell her, that sort of just little things which are huge to your world and no one else. Like, I think that's probably a lot of it is because they are more relatable. And yet there's also this huge ass scary thing going on outside, which, I live in Oklahoma City. We had a bombing. You may have heard of it about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Like it could be something like that where, I can remember things going on in my life then. And we also had this major catastrophe. Like, I'm glad they haven't made that movie, but I can see them doing that sort of thing.
Is it weird that they haven't made that movie, to be honest? Like, of all the things that they have, they didn't make a Oklahoma City bombing movie, but they made a Boston Marathon bombing movie.
That's true. Patriots Day.
Yeah,
Something
one of those
Day.
Peter Berg movies.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, you're right. Okay, so like there was a stretch there where Peter Berg and Mark Wahlberg were making all these things that are like real life quasi disaster movies. Like
right.
I did see the Boston Marathon one. I did not see the Deepwater Horizon one. I don't even remember what that was called. Maybe Deepwater Horizon.
I think it's called Deepwater Horizon.
Yeah,
It's a good enough name on its own, right? Like,
and there was another one, oh, Lone Survivor, which I guess is not really disaster, but it's a true story.
it's like disaster adjacent.
Yeah, exactly. Disaster adjacent. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, so you're right. That's kind of a mini cycle in itself.
Well, and like Godzilla, right? Like Godzilla 1999, like that. I wouldn't consider it a disaster. It a disaster movie, but it is disaster adjacent because they're using Godzilla to be like the creator of said. It's the only Godzilla movie like that that's like more about the destruction Godzilla's causing than anything else. Like, and you know, baby raptors running around, but
And because it's Roland Emmerich, that's the other
yeah,
reason.
well, yeah,
Like, that was his thing. And he's still doing that. Like,
Geostorm.
Geostorm. Well, actually, I think that was his partner who did that one. But it's the same.
Moonfall. Yeah, no, Moonfall, where the moon is falling to Earth.
Have you seen it? It's awful. It's terrible. And I don't even count those. I mean, yeah, Geostorm is, I guess, effectively a disaster movie, but it's such a piece of shit. I could not finish it. Moonfall is the same way. They're just awful.
And they're not like, if disaster movies were fun, right? They're not even fun.
Right. They're not. And the old, all the old ones that we're talking about from the 70s, there was definitely a soap opera aspect to them because you had all the side plots of these personal problems and relationships that were going on. And those are pretty much absent now. You do get, I mean, yes, there are side stories, but they don't really live on their own. They are very connected to the thing. So there's a big difference. The casts are smaller, so you don't get that sort of spider web effect of which thread are we going to follow next. And let's keep jumping to the next. We got to go revisit Leslie Nielsen. Let's go see Robert Reed, Doug McClure, Burgess Meredith. What are they up to? We haven't visited them for 10 minutes.
Check Ava Gardner in the elevator.
Exactly. Charo, I think, appears in something. So, there's just a huge difference of scale that I think really does play into these. Not just the scale from going from 70s theatrical to 70s made for TV, but yeah, especially now. Current disaster movies, as few as they are, they still exist to 70s TV. That gulf is even wider.
I don't think I'm going to have any answers tonight. I think all the ones that I was familiar with are not made for TV. So if we ever do 70s theatrical disaster movies, I'll have a couple that I've watched a lot. But really, I need to play catch up with these because I love this genre myself, and it's been far too long.
Doesn't sound like a couple. It sounds like one specific one over and over again, apparently. That's crazy. I mean, when I think of Earthquake, I think of the Thing at Universal Studios. That's what I think of. Right, the big one where they take you into. But here's the thing. So my parents lived through the 1989 earthquake in San Francisco, like the thing that the fucking ride is based off of. And so whenever we would go on it, my parents would just be like, it was nothing like this. This is not how it actually was. But I think it speaks more to the idea of how prolific these kinds of movies were, that Universal Studios made a spot for it on the tram ride. And then in Florida, they turned it into its own ride, which is unfortunately now gone and has been replaced by Fast and the Furious Supercharged, which is just the fucking worst. Talk about the fucking worst. That is just the fucking worst. But it speaks to more the proliferation of these kinds of disaster movies, that a major American theme park is willing to set aside space at 2 parks to recreate Earthquake, a massive movie at the time. I mean, again, you can't really recreate the Poseidon Adventure. I get it. That's a little bit more difficult. But the fact that it's there at all, I think, speaks volumes to how prolific the theatrical movies are. And I think to your kind of point, Rod, the TV movies don't exist without the theatrical ones being successful. That's kind of how the tastes are formed that way. Like,
I mean, even Earthquake, with that a lot of people confuse that as Irwin Allen. It's not. He had nothing to do with that one. But the fact that it came in like so sandwiched between some of the bigger ones, like that was probably the first big, huge, I want to say ripoff, but definitely like other studios being like, oh, we got to get in on this. Like, we got to beat him to the punch. What has he not done? Earthquake, go. That, like, yeah, exactly. And TV, yeah, absolutely. They weren't making these things that I'm aware of, at least anyway, with any regularity. I'm sure there was something like, well, in fact, I know there was like a Titanic movie made for TV, but in fact, there are several now. But back then, yeah, disaster movies on made for TV probably weren't even qualified by that name, right? Like, we didn't know what that meant. That probably wasn't a label that existed back then. But man, once they started making money at the box office, TV was where it's at. And Airport being the first big one, and then it had all three sequels. TV, you have, I mean, there are probably more airplane movies made for TV than anything else that would qualify for disaster. They had, like, even though the theatrical, we're copying Airport, like, Charlton Heston is in one of the Airport, I think he's in the first Airport sequel, but he was also in a movie called Skyjacked that was released in theaters by Warner Brothers. Not Irwin Allen. Airport wasn't Irwin Allen, but still, it's like just some other people, right? Like, he's in a ripoff, even though he's part of the real franchise too. But TV, you have Mayday at 40,000 Feet with David Jansen. You have SST Death Flight, which that's another Burt Convy thing, and that's been on Mystery Science Theater 3000, so people are likely to have seen that through that. But like, there's so many airplane movies on for television, and it's like we couldn't get enough air disaster, which I it feels weird today saying some of that stuff when we have like the bolts falling off the planes of Boeing and the doors flying off and Delta rubber slide coming off during the landing and all these near misses on at the airports by planes coming in, or Harrison Ford even a few years ago, or I guess that was just last year, a year or two, flying his little plane and almost hitting a big, one of the big airliners. Like, we love our air disasters. Unless
they're cheap.
Yeah. And we're not in it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they hit a little too close to home sometimes, right?
Right. Well, in this day and age, anytime you step in an airplane, you could be in your own air disaster film. So, courtesy of Boeing.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of the glut of TV disaster movies, on to the next question. Could you recommend a lesser known deep cut from the made for TV 70s disaster films oeuvre? Maybe wouldn't be the best thing for someone to start with, but definitely they still couldn't go wrong here.
I'm okay for this one. I'm going to go with one of the Irwin Allen ones. I mentioned it, but Cave In. That has an exclamation point in the title, which you should always include if you're going to write about it. But one of the reasons is because, guess what? It's a bunch of people in a cave. They get caught in like 5 Mile caverns at Yellowstone. Rock collapse. They don't look very real rocks. But that's okay. It traps like Ray Milland down there. You have Susan Sullivan, who was on Falcon Crest, which is a big show in the 80s. Leslie Nielsen is a cop. Again, this is just before Airplane, but he's in there. You have a fugitive who's down there with him. So, are the cop and fugitive going to have to work together to survive? Yes. It's done by the guy that director's name is George Fenady, which is not a big name, but he did a lot of like B stuff. Like Terror in the Wax Museum is one of his. There's a lot of flashbacks to what their lives were like when they weren't stuck in a cave. And that's where you get the soap opera elements, right? But then it keeps coming back to the cave and how do you get out of these rocks? You know, you got to squeeze through this tight crevice. Here's a gap you got to jump. Here's some bubbling, burning hot water that you have to like walk across this rock path. It like keeps putting them through this obstacle course of things. And then, of course, you have the rickety wood bridge with rope that they have to cross, like at the end of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And the one that actually always kind of gets my claustrophobia going is they have to swim underwater like a big rock wall and to get to the other side, and that kind of stuff always freaks me out. Even when it's a no budget movie like this, that kind of stuff just gets my pulse going just a little too much for comfort. So the cave in, there's not a ton of money that was invested into it, but it has some big names, and they get caught, and they have to figure out how to get out, and they work together, and you get to know their home lives and how they got here, and everything works out at the end, except for, those few people who die on the way, right? Because someone's got to die. But that, I would recommend that. It's not, there aren't many cave-in movies. I think that's the only one I can think of. But I would say it's less, I would recommend it as a deep cut only because the spectacle isn't there as much, because it's in a cave, right? But it's still, again, I haven't run across one that I wouldn't recommend. They are all fun. Every single one I've seen, and I've seen probably close to 24 of them. Every single one of them has been fun. I will say I mentioned the competing gondola movies. So one of them is called Skyway to Death. And it is, the short, sweet 90 minutes. But then the other one is Irwin Allen, Hanging by a Thread. And it was broadcast over 2 nights. So it's like 3 hours put together. But they're both, both a lot of different people trapped in a gondola. But like one is, I think one is just there because of like mechanical failure / weather issues. And the Irwin Allen one has to bump it up where it's like one of the guys riding the passenger gondola up to the mountain. He just is there to go picnic with his family. But guess what? He's under witness protection because he's a whistleblower, and the trial's happening in a few days. But he just had to go this picnic with his family. So the
how convenient
gets like hijacked, basically, right? Like the people are trying to keep him from testifying. So all these people are trapped up there because of his dumbass. Have to go just stick in that picnic. So usually these things that just have ridiculous concepts, ridiculous dialogue, ridiculous acting. But again, it all adds up for me in the equation that equals fun. As dorky as that sounds, it is. All these things are fun for me.
And conveniently, after what you just talked about, Hanging by a Thread and Cave-In are both on that Shout Factory box set. So if you're super into it, it might be a good time to pick that up.
I need to do that. The cover on that is incredible. I need to do that, but I already own these things on disc through the original release, which is usually Warner Archive, the DVD on demand line.
Well, and keep in mind, a lot of those made-on-demand DVDs are failing from Warner because they went with a different replicator at that time.
And Ryan, you just talked me into this. I've got to get this Blu-ray set.
to push you over the edge, the poster's still available. You love that cover. It comes with the poster.
I do. Rolled or folded? That might be the thing.
They all come rolled.
And I'm in.
Sale, everybody. You heard it here first. Well, and at least these haven't been hard to come by. I mean, Warner Archive at least existed. I mean, that's the other thing. You mentioned it. A cursory Google search or YouTube search will show you that you can watch essentially all of these made-for-TV things on YouTube. Similarly to Indian cinema, they don't give a shit because they weren't figuring out ways to make money up until this point on it anyways, so just make it free. Who cares?
Yep.
Yeah, Disaster on the Coastline, that is one I saw on YouTube. I don't believe there's been a legitimate DVD release of it, but it is easy to find and worth your 90 minutes. Not going to take you long. In fact, I would watch it on a train. That's how much fun it is.
But would they show it on a train? Probably not. Isn't that the whole thing with they can't show movies about airplanes being destroyed on airplanes? It makes everybody uncomfortable.
I've only been on a train once in my life. It was like a 4-hour deal. They don't show movies. They have a snack car, but they don't show movies. But in this one, they have a very active bar car. Like a lot of people hanging out at the bar. There's a guy there who is, which is pretty funny for 1979. He's mansplaining the idea of sushi to an Asian woman.
What?
Yeah. It's just
cultural mansplaining even.
It's a throwaway scene. In I don't even know that people knew what sushi was back then. They don't even use the word sushi. But just the fact that how he's explaining it, you got to dip it in this sauce. And it's, you got to take your chopsticks and dip it in this sauce. It's hilarious.
I like the voice that you're doing too. The voice that you're doing is pretty. That's why Ryan's laughing so fucking hard.
I'm overdoing the voice.
It's great though.
Not that East Coast.
Most people in the 70s.
It's raw fish. They don't cook it at all. No cooking. Crazy.
The word sauce suddenly has like 11 letters in it.
Sauce. Sauce. It's made from soy. You know the beans? Soy sauce. God. Oh, we do know. Thank you. This is a sushi restaurant. You don't have to tell us. That's too funny. I do like the idea of a cave-in movie being the choice here because, to your point, a cave-in movie and on the big screen would be pretty goddamn boring. Yeah, cave-in's not an active thing. It, like, happens, and that's it. Like, you have to navigate the aftermath of the cave-in. Yeah. The cave-in itself is, like, 2 seconds.
Once the rocks fall, it's like, right, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Movies are more about the disaster happens either in the middle or towards the end, right? It's about delaying your satisfaction. It's all about the foreplay. But
it's
TV,
like a timer too, right? Like there's like a timer. Like with the Poseidon Adventure, like the boat is sinking. We need to get out of it. Like Towering Inferno, it is on fire. We need to put it out. Cave-in, we need to leave. Yes.
Well, I think there was I may be misremembering. I think there was an air situation, like oxygen levels going down, something to that effect.
Sure.
It's been a couple years since I've seen Cave-In.
I mean, that would be believable.
So I was alive when almost all these things came out, but I did not start watching disaster movies within, I think, 2012, 2013. Was really when I went back and started watching Airports and the Irwin Allen things. Like I had tried in little bits, like over the years, like just like a whole subgenre that I had always been interested in, but never was able to dive into it. No pun intended for like, the underwater ones. But for whatever reason, a divorce, I was able to get into it and invest the time and just went down, had a few years of complete loneliness where I could just sit and watch these things forever. And they help get me through a tough time. And so that may be part of my love too, but that I still seek these things out.
Well, so speaking of things being important and transformative, even, what, in your opinion, Rod, to answer the third question, is the biggest impact on pop culture that made for TV 70s disaster films have had?
Made for TV, that's the tough part. I Made for TV, if we're just talking about made for TV, culturally, I would say it is that you can do what the big screen does on the small screen as well. Like today is all about prestige TV. Now, it's not disaster prestige TV necessarily, but we are like
Chernobyl.
when some when some of the biggest things are like sci-fi shows, right? Fantasy, like that has been the realm of the big screen. And the fact that you now can do that, the small screen, again, it's now these days it's mega expensive because HBO is paying for it. But the fact that you can do that you can take what would get people into a theater and do the same thing, I think is probably the made for TV's biggest impact. On a theatrical, it's much bigger. I think that they helped the disaster films bridge the gap from like the biblical epics, like the Cecil B. DeMille, the Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, like all that stuff. I think it helped bridge the gap from taking those into a more relatable territory where, it's in present day. It's right. It's not taking place hundreds or thousands of years ago or ever, wink, wink. And like the effects were really the big star. Even if you had Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, it was their faces are on the poster at the very bottom in a little film strip type presentation. In fact, that goes for a lot of the disaster films. They all followed that same thing where it's like down at the bottom or around the sides of the poster. But the thing in the center is the towering inferno. It is the upside down Poseidon. That is the big star. That's the thing. And that's really what we're still selling today in a lot of these things. It's more about the special effects. They've sort of forgot the story part of it these days, but I think it did help front the idea that the concept is the thing. I mean, Titanic, that's the most successful disaster movie that's ever been made. It's not my favorite, but that the concept sold that. Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet were not who they are today. Yes, they were well known, but they were not megawatt stars, right? That was early in their careers. Yeah. That was everyone. I think people went back and back and back to see the romance, but they went first time to see what James Cameron, how he's going to sink that ship. So I think that is their larger effect for the theatrical scale. I don't the made for TV ones. I don't know that they really had that much of an impact, other than just getting some eyeballs that might not watch. I have cancer or whatever the other week's family oriented disease of the week, medical drama type stuff, or they were, other things were about divorce or medical issues, rape. They all had ripped from the headlines type of plots, but these were more These were more the realm of the big screen.
I bet a lot of these also scared the shit out of some kids too. Put some like lifelong fears into some people just for some of the most ridiculous storylines, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'll never go on a train now." Or people that have a lifelong fear of flying because they watched all of the airport movies before ever going on an airplane.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And that, I wish I could say that happened, but I didn't see these growing
Right.
up. For whatever reason, I have no memory of these things being on. I have memory of seeing like TV commercials for the big stuff being in theaters, but I have no memory of, coming Wednesday to ABC Movie of the Week. But I guarantee that would have put me off flying, getting in a car, getting near water. Like, I mean, Jaws, I didn't want to get in the swimming pool after Jaws. Seeing something like Flood would have kept me away from that. Cave In, I definitely would not have stepped foot in a cave as a kid. I mean, on one idea, on one hand, that's, I mean, that could save your life one day. Who knows, right? Your parents don't want you walking through caves anyway. But yeah, definitely. But I'm sure there's some scarred kids out there today who remember these types of things, and we're like, oh, I didn't play with matches because I saw fire. I saw that person burned to death.
Sorry, fire with an exclamation point.
Yeah, that's right. Fire.
In fact, I think Flood has one too.
Flood does have one. I think Cave In does have one, but also like if I remember correctly, the cover has a hyphen, but the actual film does not have a hyphen on it. So I'm going to say it doesn't count. Using the Leonard Maltin rules of you have to go with what is presented on screen, there is no hyphen in Cave In.
I would say, at least looking at the made for TV of it all, I think you kind of hit on it a little bit, Rod. It showed that, look, you can do what they're doing on the big screen as well as entertaining, maybe with a smaller budget, more than likely with a smaller budget, on the small screen. And now we've seen the parity between the two be 1-to-1. I mean, watching TV now on, like you mentioned, like an HBO or a Showtime or a Prime Video for that matter, you are watching movie quality programming. I mean, The Mandalorian is as good as anything you could watch in the theaters, Star Wars wise. And I think that these movies showed the medium doesn't dictate the desire to make quality filmmaking and to push the envelope. I mean, like you alluded to with prestige film, like prestige TV, I would go as far as to say, for the most part, outside of the Lord of the Rings movies, the realm of fantasy has been better represented in TV than it has in film. More in a more modern sense. I mean, look, Game of Thrones kind of is a nice term. It shit the bed at the end, but there were 5 to 6 seasons of perfectly fine TV that was doing more with a fantasy world than anybody else had up until that point, but that's because they were doing it on TV, not in a movie. If The Lord of the Rings was a TV show, it would be such an amazing TV show. Look, the new show's not terrible, but it's not telling the story of the books. It's doing its own thing. But I think that these movies overall showed you can do big things on TV. It doesn't matter that it's just TV is not a thing. Like that's gone now. Like, and thanks to something like streaming, it's even more gone. But I think you kind of hit on it. The idea that we can do something like this in a smaller scale, but still at the level that is quality of like an Irwin Allen. I think that starts here. Maybe not specifically here, but this is part of a bigger conversation that gets us to the point of a Game of Thrones on TV, or, so many other TV shows that are like, again, Mandalorian, massive budget, as big of a budget as a movie has for some of these episodes of the show.
Yeah, I think you hit on it definitely. And the weak thing with these TV films is they were rushed, right? Very tight, compressed schedules. They obviously didn't have as much money, but they had some, they had money, right? Enough to sell what they needed to sell. But the thing that they can't help is the rest schedules. And I think that's where you get, some of maybe the screenplay should have had 2 or 3 more passes, right? Maybe
That's where the jank is. It's kind of janky, right?
Yeah. Should have filmed a couple more takes of that line. But they're trying. Like, these are real actors. A lot of the directors were the same as the people making the big screen stuff. So it's not like this was passed off to, junior varsity. It's like, it's typically the same people.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, again, it shows that, you can be, I mean, look, I think for the longest time, and I think, Ryan, you were talking about this on the last episode that we did about Jason Statham never doing a TV show. Like, there are plenty of actors that have never done TV and are just now getting into TV because the realm of TV is now not seen as kind of like lower on the totem pole. Like, look, I don't know if anybody needs to hear this, but Pedro Pascal's a great actor, but he's not a great movie actor. He's a great TV actor. That's what he's known for. They're going to make a Mandalorian movie, sure, but some actors are known for being great TV actors. Like James Gandolfini has a great filmography, but his filmography pales in comparison to episodes of The Sopranos or just that show in its entirety. And I think that, like you've kind of mentioned here, Rod, like the actual known actors being in these things on TV in the 70s is a big deal. It's a big get. And again, it goes a long way to legitimizing TV as a serious medium to tell serious stories, not just sitcom nonsense, which sitcom nonsense there's a place for it. I'm not diminishing it, but when every episode ends the way it started with everything set back to normal, I mean, again, like there's different expectations than a 90-minute disaster movie made for TV.
Yeah. And like, you're not going to see Paul Newman on the TV movies, but you're going to see all the people underneath him, right? Like O.J. Simpson. You're going to see him on TV, unfortunately. Lauren Green, Peter Graves, Regis Philbin, like the supporting cast, the line has been erased.
Right.
There's no movie actors, TV actors there. They're just actors that play on both sides of these.
It's true.
And I think that's important. I think that kind of democratizing nature of made-for-TV movies, and then again, like we've mentioned, prestige TV is important. Because, I mean, in this day and age of streaming, like, I don't necessarily go to the movies very often, but I watch a lot of stuff on streaming, and a lot of it would be effectively made for TVs. I mean, that's effectively made for streaming is just a different way of saying made for TV. I mean, it really is.
You're right, yeah. Yeah, they don't, we used to say miniseries for something that's broadcast 2 or 3 nights, or nowadays we don't use that. We call it a limited series. Yeah. Everything has changed, but yet it hasn't. Like, it's the same thing. It's just being called something else.
Well, even then, the limited series now is like 6 to 8 hours, and that's like, well, limited used to be 2.5, 3 hours.
Yeah.
And then you got something like Big Little Liars that was a limited series in its first season and came back for a second season. That's not how this works. They're not using that word correctly, like, at all.
Now they're doing a third.
That's not a limited. That's a show, guys. Don't don't try to pull the wool over our eyes. I mentioned it because it won like a Golden Globe or an Emmy for being a limited series. And it's like, guys, no, you can't do this. It's not fair.
Well, they don't compete in limited series anymore. Once they get that second season, they're competing in a different category.
But that show, what, had Nicole Kidman, Reese Witherspoon, like people who made a name for themselves in movies being in TV shows. Like, that is a thing because of things like this. I don't know if it's 1-to-1, but I mean, the 70s disaster movies made a ton of money and were a big deal to the point where they're their own thing. So yeah, just like Westerns used to be a thing, just like musicals, like when we did the musicals with Will Dodson, like those kinds of musicals, they don't do those anymore. They don't do these kinds of movies anymore. Not with the regularity that the 70s was just like every fucking week, I'm sure, was just another thing, some other disaster, which, yeah, like,
Not with the care. Like the asylum still shits these things out. And that one I talked about is called 12 Disasters of Christmas. So that exists. But they're all, they have the weirdest, like, 1,000 mile per hour hurricane, or just the most random.
Sharknado?
Yeah, I was about to say Sharknado's in that group, right?
I mean, technically, although I don't count it, but yeah. I tried watching that and I just can't. Like, something about all those asylum things, they just eat at my soul. There's just so little care put into them. Everything seems not even first draft, but half draft. And I just can't watch them.
So you're showing me the script and it's on a napkin. Was that the first or final draft, or something?
And that's how they made a movie called Velocipaster.
Yeah. Or Night Swim, right? Is that the one about a killer pool?
It is.
Yeah.
But that's
a ghost in a pool.
Hey man, that was theatrical, so.
Well, it was also on, I believe it was also on streaming the same night.
And it was Blumhouse. That's the crazy thing.
Well, is it crazy though? Speaking of people that'll make anything.
For how rough of a year they've had, it is kind of crazy.
That's fair.
But I do think all the other things that we're talking about is a really great way to transition into our fourth question. Rod, what is a cinematic bridge to 70s disaster made-for-TV films? Because I think if anybody's sitting at home and having never seen these, which is probably going to be a lot of people, and they go, man, I wonder if I really am going to like these. What do you think is something that might clue them in that they would like checking out this genre?
Well, I've already mentioned Airplane, but I like that now is like that was 1980, I believe. So we may be getting to a point where people haven't seen Airplane. So I will go with something like Die Hard or Speed. Speed is actually probably the better analog there because it is about the concept. A bus that's out of control. I think that's the perfect one. Speed. Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock. Again, that movie made Sandra Bullock's career big time. It certainly helped Keanu Reeves, but like Sandra Bullock was not very well known before that. And that's so the sequel without Keanu went even bigger disaster because it was on a boat, but that movie sucked. I think Speed 2 Cruise Control, but I would say the original Speed is a good, a perfect bridge. Die Hard.
You mentioned those two. You got to mention Dennis Hopper though when you're talking.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Dennis Hopper. Yeah, I mean he is he's a perfect villain there.
It's a perfect movie to be.
It really is. I think it is. I mean, and the cast below that, like Jeff Daniels, Glenn Plummer, who was like, you speak of like the side characters. He was the guy that like one of the drivers of the car, like kept getting pushed into the water things and the highway. Yeah. Just like, and that is a perfect movie. I gotta agree. And that's directed by Jan.
Alan Ruck in that one too?
Yeah,
Alan Ruck is in that movie.
And then Jan de Bont directed it and did Twister. So there's
speaking of Twister.
Yeah. I'm kind of being, Oklahoma City is where I am from and live, and Twister was shot around here. Twisters as well was shot around here. So I am excited to see it.
Same.
If only for that. Yeah. I mean, like,
Twister is a fucking good movie. Come on, right? Like, that's not a controversial opinion.
No, I saw it in theaters and I was like, that was fun. And then I watched it again. And I was like, oh, I kind of hate that. And I watched it again. And I'm like, I love it. It ebbs and flows. I think it's depending upon how you feel. But like this week, my wife and I, because we had like severe weather here, threat of tornadoes. And she was like, so if a tornado hits and decimates Oklahoma City, like, do you really think they're going to release Twisters?
Fuck.
Like so soon? Because I think it's supposed to come out in like June or July. I mean, they've delayed things. I mean, when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, they delayed a lot of movies. There were like 3 or 4 that got delayed. Top Dog with Chuck Norris being one of them, and probably should have been delayed forever because that had a bombing thing in it. But I mean, she's got a point. Like at some point, these things aren't entertainment when it happens to you, right? Like, I mean, we talked about the airplane thing. Like, that'd be the last thing I'd want to go see if my neighborhood was demolished by a tornado. Knock on wood, it wasn't, and it hasn't.
West Omaha just had that happen last week.
Right.
Like, literally, Lincoln, Nebraska, where I live, had fucking tornadoes. Like, are they going to show Twisters at the Elkhorn movie theater? Probably, which is in pretty bad taste. I'm like, because I know there's a movie theater in Elkhorn. Like, I know. Like, and I wonder, are they going to show Twisters? Probably, and people will unironically go watch it. Like,
exactly.
I can't blame them.
No, exactly. I mean, we've seen, I think all of us have been in at least a fender bender before, right? And yet we'll still go watch a car chase movie or something where, big car crashes that you would not want to be in, but it doesn't keep us from seeing that. So, yeah, there's an issue of, taste maybe at certain times and timing, but it's life, and there's a lot of money involved. So these things will keep coming out, and I'll give them all a try at least.
I actually think my answer is more or less similar to yours, Rod, which is like anything by like Jan de Bont in the 90s, like his stuff. If you're into 90s disaster movies, I guess if you're into the oeuvre of Roland Emmerich, probably you'll be into these movies. Like if you're into the spectacle of things, this is like the theatrical movies, obviously, and the TV movies the same. Like the spectacle is probably even more important in the TV movie because they're getting asses in the seats because of the concept alone. Like the execution may not even be that great, but there's a train heading towards another train. Crazy. Like, yep. And you sold me right there. So, I want to watch the movie you mentioned, Disaster on the Coast Lighter, because again, it sounds fucking absurd.
Totally.
Yeah, that's for me. It's when these things are operating with a level of self-awareness and not fucking serious. That's when I'm excited. Like, I think Twister might be a perfect disaster movie because it's fun. It is about tornadoes, but Bill Paxton makes that movie fun. Now, look, Helen Hunt hated Bill Paxton. They couldn't stand each other. But that notwithstanding, I think that movie is fun, even though it's a movie about tornadoes destroying people's homes and livelihoods. But that's weird to say that it's a fun movie. And I wonder if the new movie's going to be that way, because as far as I'm concerned, if it doesn't capture that same feeling of fun, it missed what made the original movie good. And I think that similarly to this, there needs to be a sense of fun when you're making these movies, not to make light of things, but I mean, there is a time and a place for these things to be serious, but I'm not the best person to ask, do you want to watch a serious movie about a concentration camp? Because I'm going to say no every time. Because that's just not something that motivates me, and I'm not going to want to watch a serious disaster movie 9 times out of 10 either. Because when it comes to something like this, the reality of it is so oppressive that I would rather enjoy it in an entertaining way as opposed to the movie about the Kansas City hotel collapsing and killing 70 people. Like, why isn't that a movie? Because it's fucking depressing and there's no way to make it entertaining. That's why. And that's the thing. Titanic leaves room to be entertaining because there were so many people on the ship that you can tell any number of stories, but try glamorizing half of these things and you really can't. So in a lot of ways, those stakes have to be upped because the more ridiculous the stakes, the more you can kind of have fun with it versus just, again, an Oklahoma City bombing movie, which sounds like a lot of fun, said nobody, at all. I guess now you'd make it and be like, well, we're going to draw parallels to what's going on in the country now, and then we'll call it Civil War and nobody will like it.
No, now if they do it, it will be Prestige TV, and it will be a limited series. That's how
Right.
they'll do it.
And what's the actor who plays Jeffrey Dahmer? He'll play Timothy McVeigh. Evan Peters, in the role he was meant to play, Timothy McVeigh. And Jesse Plemons will play the other guy, the guy who helped him. Yeah. And then we'll have I don't know. I mean, like, but that's the thing. Like, that's what you're talking about. That's what this has become. Like, the Waco TV show is a disaster movie, like, in TV form. Like, yeah. All of these things now, like, I think my cousin even is in the show about the guy who was trying to safeguard against 9/11. That was a fucking disaster TV show too. Like, it's not that they're not making him in movie form anymore. It's just they're making them in TV, which is kind of ironic given what we're talking about, because now it seems like TV is maybe the best spot for these, because I'm not saying that Earthquake as a movie could be done as a TV show better, but in this day and age, it's kind of made for it. Like, you have a ensemble cast, you have 10 hours of time, you can have several plot lines that interconnect. I would think that if you're making a disaster thing now, it should be on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because now they're generally like San Andreas Skyscraper. They're centered around one guy for the most part.
That man is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
It's like they're not like they were.
Those little side quests have to serve the hero, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, that was what was so fun about Poseidon Adventure and the like, is like there's so many things going on at once. It's not just one thing. I mean, Chernobyl is a great example of how to do it. Like, Chernobyl is amazing. Chernobyl might be one of the best things of TV in the last, like, 20 years. But it's a disaster show. I mean, it's ostensibly about a disaster. And then the thing that's interesting is because it's a TV show, you get to see the fallout, which the movie might not provide. So,
no pun intended, fallout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of disaster shows, that's a great disaster show in and of itself, as well. So, you know.
Yeah, and you never know on these like the TV, especially now. You know, it's like you don't know necessarily who the hero is going to be, right? The movies, like Ryan, you said, everyone has to serve the hero, but in the TV versions, you're not really sure who necessarily the hero is going to be, unless it's based on a true story. Then you kind of know. But
yeah. Anything else, Ryan?
One thing I didn't really fully flesh out an answer for the fourth question. I will say, in my mind, I've always equated people that have liked 70s disaster movies to the exact same people that have fallen in love with 80s cult, not necessarily horror, but like grindhouse type films, where you get a lot of the same things. It's like shaggy, practical effects heavy, soap opera acting, and you still appreciate it all and find something to love in those. Those are the same people. If you like those sort of things and you've never watched 70s disaster flicks, get started, because it's going to be your next favorite thing.
Yeah, that all tracks. I like both those things. So yes, I agree with your thesis.
Well, I think that maybe next time we talk, it will be about 70s theatrical, or maybe something else. Who knows? But until then, Rod, where can people find you and the things that you work so hard on?
Well, flickattack.com is the best way. You can get the book, Flick Attack Movie Arsenal, either there or at your local Amazon. And I write here and there, but that's, let's just say that's the best place to go. And you can keep track of me at, Flick Attack on Instagram, Flick Attack on Facebook, all those things. Except that X one, I don't do that.
Smart man.
Yeah.
Wise man say, don't use X. What about you, Ryan?
I am everyone under the name The Disconnected, or under someone's favorite productions. If you are ever bored on a Thursday night, check me out. Live show on YouTube every Thursday to go over the physical media announcements of the prior week, usually with the guest, and usually have some sort of film discussion afterwards. Love to have you on there.
And for me, Weirding Way Media is where you can go to find everything I work on, which is primarily by myself or with Mike White, or with Ryan at this point, but overwhelmingly it's been with Mike White for the last decade. And you can find everything that I work on, episodes of the Culture Cast. Rod joined me two or three times. I think we did that Mummy movie. Twice.
Yeah. And then something recently.
Blood Feast?
Yeah, Blood Feast. That one hasn't come out yet, I don't think.
Oh, no, it has.
It has? Well, you didn't let me know. I guess
well, that's on me. You know what they say about depression being a hell of a thing? It's a hell of a thing. And we're lucky the episode even came out, frankly.
And this episode is also about 6 months in the future.
Yeah. We're coming to you from the future of May 1st. So technically the past at this point when you're watching this. The nuclear apocalypse may have already happened. We don't even know it yet. Wouldn't that be fun? Someone listening to us on their little TI-84 calculator. Like, whoa.
Twister's already made $714 million.
Yeah.
The biggest film of the summer, nominated for 15 Academy Awards. No one saw Twisters coming.
It blew us all away.
And if the apocalypse happens, there's an adaptation on TikTok that you can
right. Man, that would be fun though. Like the apocalypse would happen and people would just be like, hey, look at the fucking the mushroom cloud behind me. Isn't that funny? Like
see the rest, go to part 2.
Yeah, exactly. Click down below for more.
Yeah.
yeah. Who's twerking in front of the mushroom cloud? That's the question, right?
Let's do the drinking water challenge without filtering it. We could go
How much radiation did we consume? A lot.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we hope that you check out our next episode and that you continue to push your boundaries through film by checking out our next episode.